fans. I have fans. In-wind fans. Hey guys, welcome to Elevated Systems. I'm your host CJ, and today we're going to be taking a look at some budget-friendly case fans. More specifically, these case fans. These are the InWind Jupiter AJ140s. InWind's 140mm offering in the Jupiter line. So today we're going to unbox these, check out some of the features offered, go over the advertised specs, and then I'm going to install them in a PC and get some airflow, noise, and thermal measurements. As I go through this review, I think the key point to keep in mind is that this triple pack of fans retails for about $39 US. So this triple pack of fans occupies kind of unique space in the case fan market, as there aren't many ARGB fan packs in the 140mm form factor at this price point. This is a $30 to $40 price point where you typically see triple packs of 120mm fans from companies like Antec or Deep Cool or AJ140. So right off the bat, they get high marks for price point. But let's actually confirm that, and I guess we should start by getting them out of the box. Okay, well, first we do have a lot of wires, and okay, in those wires is a very simple SATA powered single button RGB controller. Looks like 3 sets of standard case fans. I should also point out that I don't see any radiator mounting screws in here, which makes sense because these are advertised as high airflow case fans, not static pressure radiator fans. I'll talk more about that in a minute, but next, these should be the anti-vibration pads you can add to the corners of the fans. Okay, finally, let's take a look at the fans. Now, the first thing I noticed is the wiring and connectors. First, these are PWM fans and come with a standard 4-pin PWM connector, and the RGB cable is separate and has a standard 3-pin ARGB connector. This means that you do have 2 cables running from each fan, but it also means no proprietary connectors, so no proprietary control hubs. You can just plug these right into your motherboard. They're also daisy chainable, although that term is a little misleading. Plugging all these together results in a parallel connection, meaning all the fans and most significantly the RGB are connected at the beginning of their segments, as opposed to a true daisy chain where they'd be connected in sequence, meaning the end of one RGB segment is connected to the beginning of the next. In practical terms, this just means that the RGB patterns will do the same thing at the same time on every fan. So, no chasing effects that run from one fan to the next, or a color cycle that transitions from one fan to another. But those type of effects generally require a control hub of some sort, and I'll take the convenience of a direct motherboard connection over the hassle of cable managing an RGB or fan hub any day. So, more points for simplicity. All right, now the fans themselves, and first off, they aren't what I would describe as hefty, but they're not flimsy by any means. The blades are transparent with a bead blasted texture as opposed to the frosted or translucent white blades we see a lot nowadays. So these should have a unique look when lit up. Also, you can see that these blades are heavily swept and have a wide spacing, which is characteristic of airflow focused fans as opposed to, say, this static pressure focused fan where the blades aren't quite swept as much and much closer together. The spacing and angle of these blades allows them to grab a lot of air and sweep it through the blades, delivering a lot of fresh air to your components. However, if you obstruct the fan with, say, a radiator or a restrictive case, then these have a hard time moving the same quantities of air because they just can't generate the pressure needed. This is due to the spacing, which allows air to basically slip back through the blades. But now you've seen everything this triple pack comes with, let's go over some of the specs. The Inwind Jupiter AJ140 is a 140mm by 140mm by 25mm high airflow case fan. It features PWM speed modes from 500 to 1400 RPM with a max rated airflow of 100.45 cubic feet per minute and a static pressure of 1.56 millimeters water gauge with a noise ceiling of 34 decibels. The fan operates on 12 volt DC at 2.52 watts with a max current of 0.21 amps. The 6 hub-mounted addressable RGB lights operate on 5 volts at 1.1 watts with a max current of 0.2 amps. Okay, now I have fans and I have a PC that needs fans. And our test system for today is a Ryzen 7 3700X with its stock Wraithspire cooler and a Radeon RX 5700 XT on an Asus Prime X570 Pro motherboard, all inside the Be Quiet PureBase 500DX. So let's go over how to install these, and I'll be configuring these with 2 in the front of the case as our intake fans and 1 in the rear as our exhaust fan, because this is probably the most typical installation setup for these fans in a standard compact mid-tower case. All right, so the first thing I want to do is just install these anti-vibration pads. And so for the 2 I'm installing on the front, I'm just gonna install them on the one side. I'm actually gonna install these fans on the inside to just give them a little more room between the fan blades and the front panel and filter, so they have a little bit of more air volume to grab and sweep into the case. And then for the rear fan, that'll be mounted on the inside, so my vibration pads will go on the back of the fan. So the next tip I have for installing fans is, first, if you have an electric power screwdriver, use that. It makes it a lot easier. If not, what I recommend doing is, because with the first time you install a fan, these fan screws are actually cutting threads into the plastic of the fan. So to make sure you get it in there nice and easy and straight, I suggest cutting those threads first in the fan so you know you're in nice and straight, and then backing it out. Now when you have to try to position it inside the case, it'll be a lot easier to get this in the second time. All right, now next thing I want to do is basically make sure I position some of my wires between the back wall of the case and the fan. That way that wire's out of sight, out of mind, and I can route it down and out of the way. All right, let's wire these up. All right, so what I want to do first, I want to find my longest wire, which should be the bottom front fan. We'll start with the fan connector. So the longest one, that's the one I'm gonna fish through and plug directly into the motherboard. So the other ones can plug into this one. So I'll take first my other front fan and plug that female connector into the male connector. And then plug my rear fan into that. Now I have this connector to plug into the motherboard. And I'm gonna do the same thing for the RGB. take this little protective cap off and plug my second fan into the first fan. And you want to make sure you line up the little arrows, but with these can't do it the other way because there's a pin missing. And then the same thing, plug my rear fan RGB connector into fan 2. Then I have this RGB connector, which the first way I'm gonna test it out is to use the little controller that came with the fan set. So I can plug that into there. And then this requires a SATA power connection. Finally, I'm gonna connect this just into, I think that is fan header number 2. Plug this in and see how it looks. All right, so by default, it looks like we have some color cycle going on. So let's see how this little button works. All right, so it's like we just cycle through the different colors, different effects. And you can see, like I was talking about, this kind of chasing effect happens on every fan at once, doesn't chase from one fan to the next. All right, and back to the beginning. All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and plug that directly into my RGB header on the motherboard. Okay, and I don't have a monitor and keyboard attached, so I can't go through the different cycles on the Asus Aura, but this gives you the idea. It's a very subtle light, and it actually works pretty well in this build because the textured blade is actually the same exact type of blade that's on the AMD stock cooler. And this gives a more, I guess, less diffused and more subtle lighting effect than, say, your really bold white frosted fans like the thermal take fans I have installed in my main system back there. Okay, so as far as installation, that was pretty easy. The ability to daisy chain everything together and then just kind of tuck those wires out of place is nice without having to cable manage some kind of large RGB control module that has SATA power coming in and USB coming in and different proprietary fan cables. This is pretty manageable. I'm not really sold on these little RGB controllers. I mean, they're convenient and they're small and they're easy to mount back here out of sight and out of mind, but that's the problem. They're out of sight and out of mind. So if you want to change the lighting in your system, then, I mean, how do you realistically easily get to this? You mean, you gotta pull your computer out, pull a panel off, and just to get to a little button to change the color on your RGB lighting. I've worked with budget fan packs, even on this channel, that have a little cheap remote control built in. In fact, the PC I built my son had one of those little remotes and he likes it. It sits on his desk and he can change the color of his lights, but to each their own. Let me know down in the comments. Do you guys use these little push button controllers? If you do you just set your lights to a single color to the theme of your build and forget it? Or is that you have some interesting way to mount it, like down under the case or behind it or something? Let me know in the comments. And that's it. Let's get into testing mode. Now that the fans are installed, let's test them out and see how they perform. So I'll test the airflow, acoustics, and thermal performance of the fans. For airflow, I'll use my anemometer to take some airspeed measurements across the radius of the fan and then convert those ratings into cubic feet per minute. I'll do this for fan speeds from 20 to 100% in 10% increments, without the front panel installed and again with it in place. For acoustics, I'll measure decibel levels at 6 inches from the front, left side of the case at fan speeds from 20% to 100% at 10% increments, and factoring in background noise, I'll chart out the true noise levels across the fan curve. Finally, for thermals, I tested temperatures of the CPU, GPU, memory, and VRM prior to installing the fans using a 20-minute 8-64 extreme CPU and GPU stress test. These are our baseline results. Then I'll repeat the test with the fan installed, again recording temps for fan speeds from 20 to 100%. And for the results, we'll start with the airflow test. Now, this isn't a test to scientifically confirm InWind's rated airflow numbers. I'd need a whole different setup for that. This is just to demonstrate how the fan speed and case panel restrictions affect the airflow of the fans. And what we see is that the unobstructed fans, represented by the blue line, show a 134% increase in airflow as you go from 20% to 100% of max RPM. That decree increases to about a 148% rise in airflow from min to max RPM when the fans are obstructed by the front panel and filter. Additionally, the front panel only reduces the overall airflow of the fans by about 37% on average across the entire fan curve. The noise levels were obtained by first getting the background and ambient noise levels. This included locking the CPU fan to 20% and the GPU and case fans at 0, and taking a sound measurement at 6 inches from the PC. This reading of 42 decibels was then factored out of the subsequent readings, allowing for isolation of the fan's air turbulence noise levels. These readings were then calculated to 1 foot and 2 feet distances. And these fans did well and are pretty quiet at 1 foot, and it's not until the 60% point that the fans even exceed the ambient noise level and become noticeable. Also, the sound profile of the fans isn't, well, annoying. I mean, not sure if there's a more scientific way to say that. There's absolutely no motor whine. In fact, the rated motor noise level is 34 decibels, which in this case is inaudible. So you just get that sound of flowing air, and as is typical, the larger the fan, the lower that sound is, so the less annoying. Okay, the thermal performance numbers, and you see there was, of course, a huge drop in temps going from, well, no case fans to the case fans running at just 20%. But from there, these fans deliver enough air to the system that temps pretty much level off regardless of how fast you spin them. In fact, between 30% and 100%, temps only decrease by 4% on the CPU and 6% on the GPU. They drop a bit farther, 15% and 17% on the VRM and memory, respectively. So I just loaded you up with a lot of charts and data because this is a tech review and that's what I'm supposed to do, right? Well, kinda, but more importantly, using these 3 charts, I'm able to dial in a very efficient fan curve for my system. I know my fan noise isn't noticeable until I hit about 60%, and I know that the cooling potential of the fans levels off pretty quickly, so I initially set the InWind Jupiter AJ140s to a max of 50%. Now the loudest thing in my system is the GPU and CPU coolers, and because I know I have a lot of airflow headroom from the case fan still, I can dial back the fan speeds on the CPU and GPU and make up for it by increasing the much quieter InWind fans. Ultimately, I was able to settle on a max CPU fan speed of 70%, a GPU fan speed of just 65%, and the case fans max out at just 60%. Right now, I'm sitting next to the system under load, and it's barely audible. So performance-wise, these InWind Jupiter AJ140 case fans get high scores. I don't really actually have a scoring system other than their performance exceeds their price, which, as always, is good in my book. Again, the only complaint I have is this impractical little RGB controller. Now, while most people who buy these probably will plug them directly into an ARGB header on their motherboard, for the many people who don't have that option, or like me, don't really want motherboard RGB software anywhere near your system, having a more convenient solution like a cheap little remote would be a small improvement. Anyway, that's my take on the Inwind Jupiter AJ140s. Big thanks to Inwind for sending these over. If you want more info, check out the link in the description below, as well as to links where you can pick up your very own set of Jupiter fans in both the 140mm size and the 120s. Those are affiliate links, so any purchase you make does support the channel with no increase to your cost. As always, you can also support the channel by hitting that like button and subscribing. That'll do it for me. I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe.